Very much, Eric. That was very interesting. Without further ado, let me just introduce the rest of the panel and set up the order for the discussion. The panelists are going to stick to more or less 5 minutes each, and then we'll get a bit of a discussion going. So I'll just introduce people in the order in which I'm likely to speak, which is a little bit different from the order of the program. So the first speaker will be Peter Duschinsky, who is a gentleman with a lovely mane of white hair on the extreme left. He's
by the way.
well, that's why I said it. He's a former colleague, and he's an ex-foreign service officer who was involved intimately in the Francophone recruitment program. But he's here not only because of that, he's also here because the Department of Citizenship and Immigration doesn't do an awful lot of recruitment per se. It's more of a model of people come to the department. This is an exception, but it gives you a better sense of the sorts of things that need to happen in order to service communities like North Bay and other smaller centers. So Peter will speak first. I think the second person who I'd like to speak would be Vic Satzewich. And Vic is a professor of sociology at McMaster University, and Vic has been traveling around and interviewing foreign service officers, and so he has another perspective on how the machinery of selection operates. I think after that, if we could go first to Paul Finley, who's a business development officer with the Greater Sudbury Development Corporation. Paul made himself heard yesterday, but what we'd like to do is to get a perspective on attraction and recruitment from an economic development perspective. And I'd say the same thing also from Crystal. If Crystal Brissot, who is the immigration marketing coordinator for the Timmins Economic Development Corporation. So we get kind of a bottom-up view of the same thing. And then the final speaker will be you, John. John Nadeau, who's an associate professor of marketing at the School of Business at Nipissing, and he's an expert on branding. And as I said at the outset, we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about awareness and how to get information out. And Vicki made the point that you really need to know your market before you try to pitch to them. So that'll be an interesting perspective as well. So I'll turn it over to you, Peter.
I've destroyed more microphones in my time than most people have to do with, so forgive me if I'm not good with technology. Anyhow, after the wonderful speech that Jerry made, I don't know how to really approach this at all. I think both Jerry and Meyer, in different places and different times, have worked together. We have worked together. In any case, I'm an immigration foreign service officer with 32 years experience. I've been retired since 2005. I have served as an immigration program manager abroad, involved in all aspects of immigrant and refugee selection. In Canada, I was the CIC International Region representatives on the committees elaborating the implementation mechanisms for economic immigrants in the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, which is the present act. These included the Federal Skilled Workers Class, the Provincial Nominees Program, and the business classes. I co-founded and co-chaired the Federal Provincial Working Group on the implementation of the Provincial Nominee Program in Canada, of which, of course, Jerry has given a wonderful example talking about Manitoba. I designed, administered, and participated in the first Francophone immigrant recruitment initiatives abroad. Since I have been retired more than 5 years, I think I can speak openly, and the views I express here are entirely my own. I'm only my own. Perhaps I should say something which is not in my notes, but which came up several times during the day today, and from what I understand, I wasn't here yesterday morning, also yesterday morning. It seems to me that people have a feel of this importance of connection, I think Meyer mentioned this, connection between the local and in my case the international level, between the federal and the provincial levels. And I think a lot of the problems in immigration in Canada, in fact, are a function of disconnects. And if we can somehow get to the core of these disconnects and how to cut across them, and again, Jerry gave a very good presentation, I thought, about cutting that disconnect in the case of one province, then I think we're making some progress. Now, directing immigration to smaller centers has been an important policy and operational challenge. During the past 10 years, effective mechanisms have been created to address the provincial imbalance in immigration and facilitate the admission of skilled immigrants. The first of these mechanisms, and again, Jerry has talked about the Manitoba example, but it's actually nationwide, is the provincial nominee program. And through this program, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and the Atlantic provinces have been receiving a progressively higher percentage of skilled and business immigrants. Essentially, the focus has been in virtually all the provincial nominee programs for skilled and business immigrants, albeit the provinces can define the program exactly as they wish, and they are in charge of selection, even though technically there is an element in the Immigration Act which keeps the selection decision to the federal officers like I was. The actual selection in 100 cases or 99 cases out of 100 is in fact being made by the province. Okay? So there is a provincial nominee program, and recently there has been a new Canadian experience class introduced, to which again Jerry has been referenced, that facilitates the conversion of temporary foreign workers and temporary foreign students to permanent residency. Yes, there are certain issues and problems with this program still. Perhaps it's a bit too stringent. But in terms of actually meeting specific labor market needs, I'm afraid it's the best we have. Here I should perhaps say, it's not in my notes, but I'll say it, I do not believe that the federal skilled worker program can meet real labor market needs, for two reasons. One, it was designed as a human capital program, essentially, and David earlier today talked about the human capital type of programs and how they fit into the economic model. But what they do not do is provide people for specific jobs that there may be available in the Canadian labor market. So I don't think the federal skilled worker program really does that. And secondly, and unfortunately this is the most important constraint, processing times at Canadian missions abroad have been and remain extremely long for federal skilled workers. Not for all classes of immigrants, but for federal skilled workers. As a result, to kind of think of bringing a skilled worker to Canada for a specific job is kind of unrealistic, because I mean the company may be long bankrupt by the time the guy arrives. So. There you go. Now, Ontario, and we're talking about Ontario here, I guess, has been relatively late in getting into the whole interprovincial immigration business. And was very...
I was telling you you're about 5 minutes now, so just in terms of pacing yourself.
Okay. Ontario has a provincial nominee program, and it's a recent one. It has a relatively low number of certificates that it issues. The last figure I saw was 1,000. But there are no certificates reserved to northern communities as such. I suspect most of those certificates probably go to the South. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not sure what the involvement of Northern communities is in the provincial government program. It seems to me that Northern Ontario municipalities need skilled worker immigrants to meet specific local skill shortages. Northern Ontario municipalities also need Francophone immigrants to meet real social, cultural, and economic needs in minority Francophone communities. I have considerable experience in this area, so I can entertain any questions on it. In any case, progress has been made. I think very real, I looked at the statistics, very real progress has been made in the past 5 years, but I think there's progress still to be made. I think I'll cut it short now. And I'll just perhaps say one more thing. It seems to me that the needs of Northern Ontario are quite distinct and different from the needs of Southern Ontario, okay? Now, if there is to be an effective immigration program that focuses on Northern Ontario, it seems to me that exactly these connections between Northern Ontario, the feds, and especially the province down in Queen's Park have to somehow be created. Thank you.
So as Meyer suggested, I'm doing a research project. I have a grant from SSHRC, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And my grant, basically, to put it in fairly plain language, involves how Canadian visa offices work overseas. And in particular, I'm interested in how decisions about who gets in are made. And so what I've been doing is basically going around to visa offices in different parts of the world, and I've been to 6 so far since July of last year. One in Europe, one in the Middle East, one in the US, one in the Caribbean, one in South America, and then I just came back from an office in Africa on Sunday. And what I've been doing is basically interviewing people like Peter, the staff members, the Canadians who make decisions about who gets in, and also the local staff, some of whom also make decisions. So Meyer asked me to kind of reflect on what I've been finding in that research project, and what might be relevant from that research for the issues that we're facing here today in terms of recruiting and retaining immigrants in small and medium-sized cities in Ontario. And initially, when I was coming up yesterday on the flight and trying to organize my thoughts, when I left Toronto, my kind of initial thoughts I thought were going to be quite discouraging in terms of what my research could lend to this issue, in the sense that based on what I've been finding with overseas immigration offices, and this is certainly not meant as a criticism of the visa officers or CIC or the process, but really because I have a great, actually, deal of admiration for the visa officers who make those decisions. But it seems to me it's really unrealistic to expect that visa offices will play much of a role in channeling, encouraging and encouraging newcomers to settle in places like North Bay, places like London, places like Hamilton, and so on. And there's lots of reasons for that, but I think the biggest part of the challenge, I think, in that context is that for most newcomers who come to Canada, we don't interview, and we don't actually talk to them before they arrive. And so the proportion of newcomers who do come, who are actually interviewed by a visa officer, is very low. And there are really only certain reasons why a visa officer would ever see a newcomer face-to-face before they arrive in Canada. So there's very few opportunities for any kind of face-to-face interaction between an applicant and a visa officer where there might be an opportunity to provide advice, counseling, guidance, and so on. That just doesn't happen overseas. The resources are so thinly stretched that there's really very little opportunity for any kind of counseling or advice or encouragement for different kinds of applicants to receive. So that's the sort of discouraging side of what I'm saying. But I think the encouraging side, and it's really all I'm going to be doing is echoing what Peter and Jerry have talked about already. But it strikes me that there are opportunities for LIPS to take advantage of the successes that the provincial nominee kinds of programs have had in terms of shifting where newcomers in Canada are settling. And I think there is some, as Jerry mentioned, there is evidence that these programs are making a difference in terms of redistributing where newcomers end up. And it strikes me that, you know, on one hand, LIPS can focus on what somebody mentioned this morning, the issue of poaching, sort of trying to attract newcomers once they're already here. But it strikes me that LIPS can also kind of play a role in attracting newcomers before they actually arrive in Canada, if there's a kind of a pushing down of that provincial nominee kind of focus to the LIPS. And it strikes me that it's not unrealistic to think that, you know, in Ontario, there can possibly be something like LIPS nominees. So in Manitoba, there are provincial nominees, and there's no, I mean, obviously there's going to be challenges, but it strikes me that LIPS might be the mechanism to create these kind of nominee processes that would allocate newcomers to specific places. So I'll stop.
Good morning. If I move around a lot, it's because I'm going to try to stay warm. So if you do the same, I won't mind. My name is Paul Finley, as was introduced by Meyer, and I'd like to thank him very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm not going to talk about Sudbury because any of you who were here yesterday heard from my associate JM, who did speak about our city and some of the initiatives there, and you'll also hear from my other colleague Scott later today, and he'll be saying a little bit, and anything else you want to know, just talk to me after. I'm going to approach this from a little different perspective. Municipalities and most groups here. My background, by the way, is in marketing, so I'm going to approach it from that perspective. We're in business. We're in business to attract business. We're in business to attract people. We're in business to help our companies build their businesses in the community. So with that said, and I'm going to try to follow the script, the format that was provided to us, you know, what are your main challenges, first of all? We have several challenges. Certainly it's been mentioned here already, geography. Lack of knowledge of our communities by the world. If you go to some place in Europe or some place in South America and you tell them you're from Canada, they kind of nod. They give, you know, they think it's mounties and beer and lakes. But, you know, do you know anywhere in Canada? And you mentioned, well, maybe Toronto they've heard of. They've certainly heard of Niagara Falls, but they don't know anything about Northern Ontario, much less any one of our cities. So we're very centric in we think the world knows about us. I got to tell you, nobody knows about us. And I come from Sudbury, and we think we're the Toronto of the North, and nobody knows about us outside of Sudbury. So I think we need to realize that there's a lack of knowledge generally around the world about who we are, what we are, other than the fact that we might be Canadians. And that's a good start. But beyond that, and that's why beyond Toronto, people don't see us. We have competition. We have a lot of competition. Know our competition, who our other cities are, and it's fair to say that the 5 cities in the north and various smaller communities, we're all in competition with each other to attract people, to attract talent, to attract business, to attract economy. So we need to realize, and then we have larger centers and other countries around the world, the US, Europe, and what have you, Japan, China. They're all in competition with us in one way or another. So when we're trying to attract skills, we're trying to attract IP, we're trying to attract knowledge, we're trying to attract all these facets of what make us a strong economy and the people that reside therein. We're in competition with a lot of others. Lack of a critical mass. That's probably one of the single things in Northern Ontario that historically has been our bane, has been a lack of the critical mass factor here. People in Sudbury don't work with people in North Bay, who don't work with people in Sturgeon Falls, who don't work with people in New Liskeard, who don't work with people in Tamaki. We're all different. No, we're not. We're all Canadians. We're all Northern Ontarians in this case. And we need to develop a critical mass of talent, of skills, and strategically position ourselves and develop a Northern Ontario strategy. And Marla alluded to some of the pan-Northern stuff that we've all been working on for the last few years and need to continue to strive to strengthen those networks. Marketing expertise and the resources to support them. We have to learn how to market ourselves effectively in the world so that we can interest people in coming to our communities in terms of attracting their investment. I attended a few months ago an FDI, Foreign Direct Investment Seminar sponsored by the Conference Board of Canada, our friends that were here yesterday. And we talked about our trade balances and about our investment balances vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Well, how about our human capital balance? Where do we sit on that? Do we really know what we have here? We're great at attracting, and I think it was alluded to today, maybe it was you, David, or somebody said in the first presentation, we're great at attracting capital. Maybe it was Art who spoke. At attracting financial capital to our country. We're pretty good at it, actually. But how are we attracting human capital? Because you can have gobs of money, but if you don't have any talent, you can't make what out of what. So I think those are the kind of the challenges that we face, the approaches. Well, relationship building, and I think it's been spoken about in various facets here. We need to build internal networks and external networks. Internally, business, education, government sectors, and so on. Externally, we need to develop global relationships so that people around the world, we become second to mind. When you go to Europe, when you go to South America, when you go to China, when you say I'm from Canada, they understand, they get it. They know the kind of people you are. It's just not the image of the Mountie. They really know that you are a class. When we used to go to Europe and promote ourselves over there, we said, listen, we know you know about our trees and about our water and that pristine image, but you know what? We're also good business people. We want you to come to our country as tourists for all those reasons that you think you love our country. But then when you get there, we want to take you to our cities and show you how modern they are, what our infrastructure is like, how well our educational opportunities perform, and the people that make all that happen. And we want you to become part of that fabric. That's very, very important. We need to have web capacity, because without that, and I think we do well, but I don't think it's focused and directed well enough. I don't think it's professionally targeted enough. We need to develop target market strategies, sectoral strategies. Know who you are, what you want, and who you need to get. We need to create greater awareness within our communities. That's that internal education mode. And incubation. A few years ago when I went to Germany, shortly after the wall came down, on the east side they created a whole bunch of business incubators. You had a bunch of talented people over there who didn't know what to do because they'd all worked for the Soviet military-industrial complex. Peter would understand some of that. But those people were put into incubators where they developed whole new concepts of business, whole new skill sets. They honed their market talents. They were connected via the web to the rest of the world. And all of a sudden, you started to see businesses that were networking with China and with Japan, and some of the greatest business networks now that occur. are because of that, because of the incubation that occurred. And we need to incubate people. We need to bring people in and incubate them within our societies and within our populations here. But we also need to incubate our own people to understand the global business modem much better than we do, and how to relate to people in the rest of the world. There are various elements. You got to know your market, what you need. You need to know your product. This is all basic marketing, folks. We need to know our products. Our branding, our imaging, our messaging needs to be consistent. Not Sudbury does this and North Bay does that and Sturgeon Falls does something else. No, we are a Northern Ontario product. This is what we look like. This is what you can expect. These are the deliverables. We have to find proper fits. Art said today, we're not going to bring a Toyota plant to North Bay or Sudbury or Temagami. But there are certain niches, there are certain areas where we have strengths, where our human skills, where our skill sets, where our natural resources lend to. There are other niche opportunities around the world. If you're at the edge, if you're at the leading edge of the curve, instead of behind the curve, thinking about it all the time, that Carmen said innovation. Fedor wants innovation. Let's be innovative in our thinking before we even think about the products. Let's be innovative and free thinking in our minds to get out there and be leading edge players. We'll find what those opportunities are, but it's a skill set, it's a mindset to be leading edge players, to get up in the morning like the rooster. Develop a marketing strategy. That goes along with it. Mobilization, a sales team. We need to get out of Northern Ontario, folks. The best thing a Northern Ontarian can do is get out of here for a while and to learn about the world and to learn what people want. Not what we think they want, what they want. And you have to get out there to meet people, to learn about what's happening in the rest of the world, what turns people on, and what attracts them. Thus brings about, when we go to market our communities, we want to, market this quality of life and all of this wonderful stuff. But why don't we think about what people want, the benefits? So let's market the benefits of living here, of working here, of coming here and developing become part of the fabric. Again, preach the benefits, not the features. The features will sell themselves. People want to know what's in it for me. Why do I want to come to your community? That'll sell. That'll bring them here. We need a good, strong value proposition. What's the deal? We've got to make it very clear what the deal is when you come here. What's in it for you again? What the benefits are, but what you can get. What your role is in our community. Make it very clear and strike the deal clearly to them. And let the deal makers know. We have deal makers in our communities. We have these networks, these people. Let them become part of the deal. It's not one person like a Don Curry. It's not you and your community or me and my community. There are deal makers all over the community. And let's find what those roles and responsibilities of those key people are and set them loose. Empower them. Empowerment is a very powerful vehicle, not just politically, but from a business and economic standpoint. Yep. And the final thing is, there are global champions out there. We need to develop externally a network of global champions, whether they be students, whether they be business people in other countries, that can speak in our behalf and make it known to those that we want to bring here that we are good people to do business with, and they'll sell it for us. That's all I can say.
I'm Krista Briso. I'm the Immigration Marketing Coordinator from the Tumas Economic Development Corporation. I've been asked to speak about community portals, particularly ours. And I'd just like to start off by giving a little bit of history about our portal. We're among 20 other communities that had the opportunity to establish immigration portals through MCI funding under the COIDA agreement. Our site was designed initially to be a comprehensive, informative, and intuitive resource for newcomers and community groups and local service providers. It was launched in March of 2009, and since then we've had over 2 million hits from 65,000 unique visitors. So in terms of just touching on a few other things that have been said throughout the last 2 days about how the Northern Ontario is distinct and has its own needs, and that we can't compete with Southern Ontario in a lot of things. I think that these portals really did even the playing field for a lot of small and rural communities. It gave us a resource that we otherwise couldn't have done on our own. And essentially, it's given our smaller center a global reach. So, initially, I think that we had targeted secondary migrants as our chief target market. And over the last year or so, it's progressed quite nicely. We've added a lot of sections, particularly the before you arrive. And we put a lot of work into making sure that there was relevant information for... It's okay, doesn't matter. We wanted to make sure that there was enough relevant information for someone who was just looking at relocating and wasn't sure of all the processes and everything like that. So, he's cute, isn't he? No worries.
The internet connection.
I can keep going on my own, I don't need it.
Okay.
So, basically what we did was we had focus groups with recent newcomers in our community, and we asked, what is the information that was most pertinent to you when you were looking for a new home? And we ensured that we have all that information that we collected from the focus groups put onto our site. We also ensure that everything's cross-linked to CIC and MCI for additional information, as well as settlement.org. And we have also recently incorporated a Why Choose Timmins section, which has actual content translated in Hindi, Tagalog, Arabic, Russian, Spanish, and Mandarin. So it's not only just the translate toggle, it actually provides content in those languages, which was a big step for us. Most recently, we've worked on establishing an employer tools section because we do recognize how important employer buy-in and participation has become. Currently, it features the Hire Immigrants Roadmap, and we're hoping to expand this very quickly. We're working with the City of Ottawa and the City for All Women initiative to incorporate their equity and inclusion lens on our site as well. So, over the course of the last year, we've really put a lot of effort into the site. We did a site-wide review, and basically went through 300 plus pages, updated everything, made sure that the information was timely, relevant, and in marketing yourself, that's always the key focus. We've really embraced the portal, and for a community like Timmins, it serves as a foundation of all our marketing and branding. Everything we do, the call to action is always the URL to the portal, and essentially all of our marketing has evolved from the portal. And now, when we're talking about challenges, of course, with this opportunity would come major challenges because it becomes an issue of maintenance and sustainability. And when you're a smaller enterprise pursuing something like this, funding is key for staffing and then also just maintaining technology and things like that. I was looking at the outline that Meyer had presented, and I felt that the approaches that hold promises were collaboration. Like we started doing content syndication with the Hire Immigrants Roadmap, and I think that content syndication from other sites is something that could really prove beneficial to smaller sites because we can use tools from Ontario Immigration and some of the tools that are on the CIC site and offer these to our employers or newcomers, and if we can't syndicate them, then otherwise we don't have the resources to build them ourselves. So I think that one thing I'd like to touch on too is not only has the portal become, our chief marketing vehicle, it's also become an aspect of our planning because we use our measurements or our analytics for measurements in terms of our campaigns that we run, what has been the impact, but we also use it for communications planning. And I wanted to touch on the coaching comments, because this is how we look at it. Before we even begin marketing, we look at our usage, and we notice that we have high usage in the GTA, particularly Etobicoke, Durham. So we look at the fact that people are already looking at our site from these areas. So if we market to these areas, it's a return on investment, because chances are, if they're already looking and we invest in marketing, we're probably going to have a few come our way. It's not like we go into it saying, okay, we're going to go take X amount of people from the GTA, and that's our hopes. There's already been an interest that we've been able to see. And it was the same with the Quebec market. We decided to market in Quebec because we noticed an increased usership from areas like Laval, Aylmer, Sherbrooke. So that's why we have done our marketing in those areas. Another thing I'd like to say about approaches that hold promise as well is, again, collaboration. Every one of the communities that has an immigration portal has usage of the Municipal Immigration Information Online extranet. And though there are some issues with the extranet itself, it is a great way for every community to share best practices, just information, and assist each other.
Thank you for having me here today. I too am a marketer, a practitioner turned academic. And I think some of my comments, or at least I want to start to close on what Paul started talking about earlier, that marketing is really broad. And then Paul's example when you want. Really? How's that? Do I have to put my mouth on it? Or? How's that? Is that better? Better. Okay, great, thank you. I was gonna, now I've lost my train of thought a bit. I was gonna build on Paul's orientation about, he kind of walked through marketing in a fairly broad context. And I think I sort of echo that approach. And I think the large value of having engage marketers in this discussion is the sort of customer orientation, right? It's to know the market, know what people want and what they're thinking and what they're feeling, right? And that leads to their actions. So I think that's the value proposition of involving marketers. My own specific interests are on images and how images are used in their decision-making process. So I know there's a difference between consumers and citizens, but let's just suspend that sort of debate for a moment, and let's see if we can learn from the marketing practice and use it in this context. But specifically, my area in terms of images, looking at place images. So how do people think of a place being a country, or a place being a town or a city, and then how does that influence their decisions? Their decisions about whether they buy products from these places, or whether they travel to these places, or whether they're willing to invest in these places. Okay? So there's been a rich literature base or knowledge base done on the product-based images, and there's more recently been branching out and doing work in investment and certainly tourism. There's a very rich knowledge base there, but not a lot yet done on immigration. We don't know a lot for potential immigrants, what they're thinking about these places, how they're making their decision, what's important to them. We know a lot about images and how they're constructed, and certainly with place images, we know about that people think about the character of the place, right? Whether they're friendly or trustworthy. They think about the competencies of the skill level workers in the area. They think about technology level and so forth. But we don't know what aspects of these place images are important to them. Some research on Canada has come up and said people do think Canadians are friendly. They do think we're trustworthy. When you compare that to Americans, who tend to be rated higher on the competency aspects. And so how does that then, how is that information used by prospective immigrants? Which ones do they rate higher? Are there common characteristics among the people that may rate those trustworthy, friendliness sort of attributes, those country character attributes is more important? What can we learn about that? There's a lot that we don't know about the immigration selection process from the potential immigrant perspective. And that's something that's important and needs some investigation. So I think I've kind of written down some other questions, but it's understanding essentially what these images are, specifically towards northern communities. Also, what are the strengths and weaknesses of these images? How are those strengths and weaknesses acted upon? And then finally, or not finally, but another example is those common characteristics. I think it may make some sense to focus on smaller communities in other countries rather than focusing on the infrastructure that's already in place to draw immigrants in the major urban areas. Maybe there needs to be some focus going beyond that and reach some common people and common types of people in other countries. But so anyway, I think I've raised probably more questions than answers in the last couple of minutes. But it's part of my job, I think, as an academic. But I think some of these answers to these questions would help direct some policy. Policy that makes more efficient use of resources and becomes more effective in terms of attracting and retaining the right fit immigrants to the urban communities. So I'll leave it on that.
Okay. I think it'll be obvious to all of you that what the program spoke to was that we talk about attraction, branding, and retention. With the exception of Jerry's presentation, we haven't touched all that much on retention, but the next two panels will follow will deal squarely with civic engagement and the adaptation of institutions to assist with integration. So we're not going to ignore that. I think rather than have me start by posing questions to the panel, it's already about 10 after 12, and we said we'd have 20 minutes for the audience to ask questions. So we're a little bit behind. What I'd like to do is to open up the floor.
You got it.
That was even funnier from my end.